Let's discuss this issue with Diesen, Professor of Political Science. Many thanks for joining us on the programme. It's very good to see you. I'd love to ask for your reaction, first of all. We have Germany here openly discussing attacking Russian territory. What are your thoughts?
Well, I think that's been one of the most dangerous aspects of this proxy war. That is the consistent redefinition of the rules of proxy war. Keep in mind when after Russia went into Ukraine in 2022, there was a lot more caution. There was concerns about sending armored vehicles, even artillery was a great concern. If you remember, Biden warned that F-16s would mean World War III. So there's been this gradual, incremental escalation and effectively changing the rules of what a proxy war means. And I think now that there's open talks about striking Russia directly from Germany, it's quite concerning. And this, of course, is coming at a very dangerous point in time when it looks as if the front lines are beginning to crack on the Ukrainian side. The Americans are pulling a bit away from this, and it appears that the Germans are increasing their pressure as a way of compensating for the losses on the Ukrainian side and the Americans losing interest. So it is an extremely dangerous stage of the war, given that the Germans now seemingly think that they can attack Russia without Russia retaliating. Now, this is a very dangerous gamble and, again, could trigger a much wider war.
You talk about the gradual upping of the ante, but do you really think it's realistic that Germany would strike Russia, or is this just saber-rattling?
Well, I'm hoping it's saber-rattling, but there's been other talks as well about supplying the Taurus missile. When Russia warned that this would be considered a direct German attack on Russia and they would retaliate, Germany instead began to look for other ways. So, for example, to suggest that they would co-produce these weapons with the Ukrainians, and the Ukrainians could do what they want. Now, this seems like a way trying to get around the being held accountable. Again, we're trying to define what are the acceptable rules of proxy war, and unfortunately, if there's a miscalculation, it could have very huge consequences.
I want to pick up on some comments that you've made yourself when you've seen images of Russian drones production. You said that NATO should make a deal today because any deal in the future would be much worse. Could you explain what you mean by that assessment, please?
Well, I think that the war has been lost. Every day is a humanitarian disaster, but also a strategic disaster. The whole argument for sending weapons to Ukraine since February of 2022 was to strengthen Ukraine's hands in negotiations. But as we see, Ukraine gets weaker day by day. Its European backers gets weaker, both militarily and in terms of economics. And of course, the Americans are pulling away. So if you think you're going to have a worse deal tomorrow than you have today, then you make a deal now. And I think the overall trend now is we see the Russians ramping up their industrial production. That is the weapons they produce. They're able to mobilize a huge amount of men, that is who's volunteering for military service, while NATO has a huge problem to catch up. That is, it doesn't have the industrial capacity, and Ukraine has a huge manpower problem. So this disparity, this gap is only growing every day as Russia goes stronger and NATO and the Ukrainians are getting weaker. So for this reason, I think it's beneficial to negotiate now. Furthermore, if I can add, if there is no negotiations that restores Ukraine's neutrality, and this would be very dangerous for not just for Ukraine, but also for Europe, because if Russia doesn't think there will be a permanent end to the war, in other words, that it will simply continue in other forms, it can be seen as giving incentives to take more territory and even destroy infrastructure in Ukraine, which could be used against Russia in the future. So in any conflict like this, you don't want to create too many incentives for the opposing side to act in a way which is harmful to your own security. So it just seems as if it would be common sense now that it's very obvious that the war is being lost and there's no way to turn this around, seeking favorable terms of negotiation today as opposed to waiting further down the road. And I know that the common argument is that why would Russia negotiate when it has when the war is going its way? But I think what Russia wants in terms of stability on its western borders, neutral Ukraine, and resolving the problem of the European security architecture, I think it's definitely worth at least trying. Is someone picking up the phone and talking to the Russians?
Yeah. There's been a lot of talk, a lot of fear-mongering, some might say, about how a war between the EU and NATO and Russia would play out. And if martial law was to be imposed in Germany, Germany would reportedly need to recruit women, people from a number of former Soviet member states, even pensioners to drive lorries. What does this say about how prepared Berlin really is for an actual military confrontation with Moscow amid all this big talk?
Well, if the people wanted to fight, they would have volunteered. The fact that you have to conscript force people into the armed services, it suggests that they're not particularly motivated, and they don't want to fight this. Now, this is a problem in the terms how a war would be fought as well. So there's a lot of problems here, and this is part of the strange developments in Berlin. That is, this eagerness to pursue this war. It doesn't really match its capabilities. It doesn't have the proper manpower in terms of the soldiers who are prepared to fight and die for either Germany or Ukraine, and also it doesn't have the military equipment. So that's why I'm thinking this could be, as you suggested before, simply saber rattling before negotiations, to hope that this could translate into a more favorable position at the negotiation table. Alternatively, this is just Germany growing more and more desperate. And I keep making the point, this is Europe bet a lot on this conflict, and a lot has been lost. So there's a lot of desperation as well. Keep in mind that when this war began, it looked as if it would be the formula for, let's call it, collective hegemony in Europe. And now the Americans have announced they're actually leaving Europe because it's becoming, so irrelevant. It's not even a distant third anymore, I think. So this is the key problem. So I think Europe has fears for its own economy, military power, and even geopolitical relevance in the world. So there's a lot of stake, and when there's everything to lose and everything to gain, this puts the strategic thinking in a very dangerous position, and countries are willing to risk much, much more. So this is a very dangerous situation, and ideally you would have the German leaders and the Russian leaders actually getting on the phone and talking to each other instead of communicating in this way with provocative statements.
And yet, under Chancellor Merz, Germany really seems to be leading the way in adding fuel to the fire of this conflict. Germany's defense minister has now said that his country will provide additional air defense systems and ammunition to Ukraine, and also contribute to the delivery of Patriot systems. Do you think Germany still has the capability to defend itself, though, given the military aid and funding it keeps giving to Ukraine?
No, I think a lot of the weapons have been given away. And again, if you look at the armed services of Germany, they don't have that big of an army. So, and it's a strange development for Germany in a relatively short amount of time, because they usually been more dovish and try to balance, traditionally after World War II, try to balance off the more hawkish elements from the United States and United Kingdom. But now that the US is pulling a bit away from this proxy war, we now see that Germany is positioning itself as being, I guess, the main leading power to continue the pressure on Russia, and in its mind is supporting Ukraine. So this is it doesn't have the capabilities for this role. It would have made much more sense if the British or the French, as more established military powers, would have pursued this. But it appears for some reason that Germany sees this as its task and relevance. So I think a lot of concerning developments are occurring within Germany at the moment, and they have a lot of political instability. There's talk about banning the main opposition party. They're having huge economic crisis, socio-economic instability. There's a legitimacy crisis among the political class, and a lot of this can translate into erratic behavior. So again, in a time like this, diplomacy is really important, and we're not seeing much of this at the moment.
Glenn Diesen, always good to hear from you. Thank you very much for your time. We've been talking to Glenn Diesen, Professor of Political Science. Thank you.